ولا يجوز أن نفسد في علاقاتنا التاريخية.
Good afternoon and thank you for joining us on FutureTV. I'm Linda Salim and these are today's top stories. Italian Prime Minister Enrico Letta promises his country will support the Lebanese army and announces a $50 million aid for countries hosting Syrian refugees. Egyptian President Adli Mansour announces the referendum on a draft constitution will be held on January 14th and 15th. And Nelson Mandela's body arrives in Kunu, the former president's ancestral village, where he will be laid to rest. Italian Prime Minister Enrico Letta says Italy will host an international conference to support the Lebanese army next year. Letta's comments came during a joint news conference with Prime Minister Najib Mikati in Beirut, following talks with President Michel Sleiman at Babda Palace. Letta said Italy will increase its assistance to the Lebanese army in terms of training and military expertise, as well as increase its cooperation on the bilateral level. Mikati says the conference, which is expected to convene early next year, is aimed at strengthening the Lebanese army to better carry out its security duties. The conference, to be held in Rome, will be a follow-up on the recommendations made by the International Support Group for Lebanon, which aims at supporting Lebanon's state institutions and its army, as well as help the country better manage the presence of thousands of Syrian refugees. Letta also announces an additional $50 million in aid for countries hosting the refugees, especially Lebanon.
Italy would work, of course, to strengthen this cooperation at the bilateral level too. Because, of course, UNIFIL is under the UN umbrella, but we decided to give our contribution on a bilateral point of view for supporting the training of the Lebanon armed forces. And Italy will organize a meeting in Rome for organizing this joint support of the international community for the organization of the Lebanon armed forces. But of course we had also important talks about the economic and trade and business situation. I promised to Prime Minister to send here a delegation for presenting the Italian privatization plan to the Lebanon business community. I think that will be interesting and important. There are a lot of opportunities. And of course we are working for strengthening the economic and commercial links.
Public Works Ministry personnel and civil defense volunteers are working on reopening vital roads across the country that were blocked as a result of heavy snowfall last night. In the Bekaa Valley, 40 centimeters of snow covered the mountainous region, while 30 centimeters of snow accumulated on various streets in the eastern town of Zahli, blocking a number of roads including those connecting Zahli and Hur Shweir, Ainatine and Yanta, and the Deir al-Ashayir road. Snow fell on low altitudes of 500 meters above sea level in South Lebanon, particularly in the district of Bint Jbeil, where temperatures dropped drastically. Syrian refugees in Bekaa and across the country are calling for sufficient aids as they're struggling to survive the storm. Nation Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has deplored the use of chemical weapons in Syria and demanded that those responsible are held accountable. Ban addressed the 193-member General Assembly on the final report issued by UN inspectors who examined 7 alleged chemical weapons attacks in Syria. They concluded that chemical weapons were probably used in 4 locations in addition to the confirmed attack near Damascus in August, which forced the government to abandon its secret chemical stockpile. The inspectors' limited mandate authorized them to determine whether chemical weapons were used, but barred them from identifying whether the government or opposition fighters were responsible for any of the attacks. UN High Representative for Disarmament Affairs Angela Kane says the inspection report could be used to pursue who was responsible for the attacks, but that decision is up to the member states.
to meet.
Today, I note with a deep concern that the team collected evidence and information corroborating allegations that chemical weapons were used on several occasions at multiple sites against both civilians and military targets. While the mission was unable to independently verify every aspect of these allegations, its assessment is that chemical weapons were probably used on 19 March at Khan al-Assal, on 24 August at Jobar, on 29 April at Sarakeb, and on 25 August 2013 at Ashrafia Sanaya. In cases where the mission obtained clear evidence of the use of chemical weapons, its findings were based on its interviews with the survivors, medical personnel, and other first responders, as well as its analysis of the medical records of the victims. These multiple streams of evidence confirm the symptoms consistent with poisoning by an organophosphorus compound. For some incidents, the mission also analyzed the blood samples, including those it collected and others it was able to authenticate using DNA analysis. For 2 incidents, the analysis tested positive for signs of sarin.
And still to come in our program, U.S. President Barack Obama marks the anniversary of the Newtown school shootings. That and more after the break. Welcome back. Egyptian President Adli Mansour has announced that the referendum on a draft constitution will be held on January 14th and 15th. A 50-member committee tasked with writing the constitution had approved the draft earlier this month. The move could change the order of elections from a previously set roadmap to lead with presidential polls rather than legislative. A political roadmap put in place by the army following the July 3rd coup against Egypt's first democratic civilian president, Mohamed Morsi, had stipulated that presidential elections take place after the nation chooses its parliament. Gaza's rescue service has evacuated more than 4,000 people from homes flooded after 4 days of heavy rain across the territory. The downpour continued today as part of a storm that covered Jerusalem and some of the West Bank with thick snow. In Gaza, some of those trapped by rising waters were evacuated by fishing boats. Authorities say rescue efforts were hampered by lack of fuel and power, a result of a tightened Egyptian border closure. And in the United States, President Barack Obama marked the anniversary of the Newtown school shootings by calling for tighter gun control and expanded mental health care. Obama will later observe a moment of silence at the White House and light candles in memory of the 20 children and 6 school teachers who died in a shooting at a Connecticut elementary school a year ago.
1 year ago today, a quiet, peaceful town was shattered by unspeakable violence. 6 dedicated school workers and 20 beautiful children were taken from our lives forever. As parents, as Americans, the news filled us with grief. Newtown is a town like so many of our hometowns. The victims were educators and kids that could have been any of our own. And our hearts were broken for the families that lost a piece of their heart, for the communities changed forever, for the survivors so young whose innocence was torn away far too soon. But beneath the sadness, we also felt a sense of resolve that these tragedies must end, and that to end them, we must change. From the beginning, our efforts were led by the parents of Newtown, men and women impossibly brave, who stepped forward in the hopes that they might spare others their heartbreak. And on this anniversary of a day we will never forget, that's the example we should continue to follow. Because we haven't yet done enough to make our communities and our country safer. We have to do more to keep dangerous people from getting their hands on a gun so easily. We have to do more to heal troubled minds. We have to do everything we can to protect our children from harm and make them feel loved and valued and cared for. And as we do, we can't lose sight of the fact that real change won't come from Washington. It'll come the way it's always come, from you, from the American people. As a nation, we can't stop every act of violence. We can't heal every troubled mind. But if we want to live in a country where we can go to work, send our kids to school, and walk our streets free from fear, we have to keep trying.
A shooting incident at a high school in the U.S. state of Colorado has resulted in the death of the shooter and injuries to at least 2 students. Authorities say one student is in critical condition while another suffers minor injuries. The shooting on Friday occurred at the Arapahoe High School in the town of Centennial near the city of Denver. Police say the shooter had entered the premises of the school armed with a shotgun, looking for an individual teacher whom he identified by name. When a student confronted the gunman, that student was shot and seriously wounded. The suspect was later found inside the school, dead of an apparently self-inflicted gunshot wound. And now for news around the world in brief. Iran's President Hassan Rouhani says the Islamic Republic has successfully sent a monkey into space for the 2nd time, part of a program aimed at manned space flight. Rouhani's website says the launch of the rocket, called Pajouhesh, research in Farsi, was Iran's first use of liquid fuel. It says the rhesus monkey, named Fargam, or auspicious, returned to Earth safely. Thousands of people have massed in Bogota's main square to support the Colombian's capital leftist mayor, who was ousted this week for trying to fire private contractors. Some of the demonstrators viewed Mayor Gustavo Petro's dismissal as a blow to the country's attempts to make peace with its main leftist rebel group, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. An opinion poll published on Friday found 54% of Bogota residents opposed Petro's ouster, with 38% in favor. Japan and Southeast Asian nations have called for freedom of the high seas and skies amid heightened tensions over China's new air defense zone in the East China Sea. At a summit between Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and the leaders of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, they agreed in a statement to enhance cooperation, ensuring freedom of overflight and civil aviation safety. They also called for disputes to be resolved by peaceful means. As of today, the iconic Eiffel Tower in Paris will be lit up with Nelson Mandela's name, while a set of flight beams will recall the colors of the South African flag. A ceremony is due to take place at the Square for Human Rights at the Trocadero, opposite the Eiffel Tower on Sunday, the day of Mandela's funeral, in which Parisians are invited to light candles to pay respect to the Nobel Peace Laureate. Well, speaking of Mandela, his body has arrived in Kunu, the former president's ancestral village, where a state funeral will be held in his honor. Mandela, whose coffin is draped with a national flag, will be laid to rest on Sunday in a private affair bared to both the public and the media. The journey to the small village started shortly after the governing ANC paid its last respects to the man who led it to power, becoming the country's first black president after a long and painful struggle against racist white minority rule. In a keynote address delivered in Pretoria in honor of Mandela, President Jacob Zuma hailed Madiba, the clan name by which the Nobel laureate was known, as a man of action. Many residents across the country also paid their last respects to Mandela.
At the end of it, he was just an unbelievable man, and we're all very blessed to have had him lead us through to the point where we are today. And our sincere wish is that whoever follows can just keep all of those ideals alive.
Just brought peace, and he just did the right thing. No, he was an amazing man, and I just wish there were a few more people like him to carry on.
This marks the end of our bulletin for today. Now let me remind you of our top stories. Italian Prime Minister Enrico Letta promises his country will support the Lebanese army and announces a $50 million aid for countries hosting Syrian refugees. Egyptian President Adli Mansour announces the referendum on a draft constitution will be held on January 14th and 15th. And finally, Nelson Mandela's body arrives in Kunu, the former president's ancestral village, where he will be laid to rest. Those are your top stories for this weekend. Yumna Nafa will give you more updates tomorrow, so make sure you tune in.
ولا يجوز أن نفسد في علاقاتنا التاريخية.